The full moon cast an eerie glow over the dense forest, its silvery light filtering through the towering trees. 4 friends, Amy, Ben, Claire, and David, decided to go camping deep in the woods to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. They set up their tents near an old abandoned cabin that looked as if it hadn't seen human presence in decades. As night fell, the friends gathered around the campfire, telling ghost stories and laughing nervously. The wind howled through the trees, creating an unsettling symphony that sent shivers down their spines. They tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, attributing it to their overactive imaginations. Suddenly, they heard a rustling sound in the bushes nearby. Ben, always the brave one, decided to investigate. He took a flashlight and cautiously approached the source of the noise. "Probably just a raccoon," he said, trying to reassure himself and the others. As Ben moved closer, the rustling grew louder and more frantic. His flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, he caught sight of a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him from the darkness. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Guys, I think we should get back to the fire," he whispered, backing away slowly. The group huddled closer together, their nerves on edge. Claire, the skeptic, tried to rationalize what Ben had seen. "It was probably just an animal. Let's not freak out over nothing," she said, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. Just as they were starting to calm down, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the forest. It was unlike anything they had ever heard, inhuman and filled with agony. The friends exchanged terrified glances, unsure of what to do next. David suggested they head back to the cabin for safety. They quickly packed up their belongings and made their way through the dark woods, the sense of dread growing with each step. The cabin loomed ahead, its broken windows and rotting wood adding to the sinister atmosphere. Inside, they found old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. The air was thick with the smell of decay. They barricaded the door with a heavy dresser and huddled together in the center of the room, hoping the walls would protect them from whatever was out there. Minutes felt like hours as they sat in silence, straining to hear any signs of danger. Then, the floorboards creaked, and a cold, rancid smell filled the air. The friends looked around in panic, realizing they were not alone. Emerging from the shadows were figures that barely resembled humans. Their skin was gray and decayed, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The zombies moved slowly, but with a terrifying purpose, their moans filling the room. Amy screamed, and the others scrambled to find weapons. Ben grabbed a broken chair leg, Claire found a rusty knife, and David held up a heavy candlestick. They fought off the zombies as best as they could, but for each one they struck down, another took its place. The friends' strength was waning, and the zombies seemed endless. Amy was the first to fall, dragged away by the undead, her screams echoing through the cabin. Ben, Claire, and David fought harder, their desperation fueling their actions. As the night dragged on, Ben and Claire succumbed to their injuries, leaving David as the last one standing. Exhausted and covered in blood, he barricaded himself in a small room, hoping the door would hold. The moans grew louder, and the door began to splinter. David knew he couldn't hold them off much longer. In a final act of defiance, he set the room on fire, hoping to take as many of the undead with him as possible. The flames consumed the cabin, and the forest was illuminated by the inferno. The zombies, relentless in their pursuit, continued to advance. As the fire spread, David accepted his fate, knowing he had fought until the bitter end. The next morning, all that remained was the smoldering ruins of the cabin and the lingering sense of terror in the woods. Blackwood Forest had always been shrouded in mystery and fear. Locals spoke of an ancient curse that befell anyone who dared to venture too deep into its heart. Despite the warnings, a group of 5 thrill-seekers, Jack, Lisa, Mark, Sarah, and Tom, decided to explore the forest and uncover its secrets. They arrived at the edge of the forest just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in hues of orange and red. With their backpacks filled with supplies and flashlights in hand, they stepped into the dark, foreboding woods, their excitement mingling with a sense of unease. As they ventured deeper, the trees seemed to close in around them, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Strange symbols carved into the bark hinted at a sinister past, and the air grew colder with each step they took. They set up camp in a small clearing, hoping to rest before continuing their exploration. As they gathered around the fire, Jack began to share the story he had heard about the curse. They say the forest was once home to a witch who practiced dark magic. When the villagers found out, they burned her at the stake, but with her dying breath, she cursed the land and its people. The wind howled through the trees, and the fire flickered, casting eerie shadows. Lisa tried to laugh it off, but the story had unsettled her. "It's just a legend, right? There's no such thing as curses," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the clearing. The friends froze, their eyes darting around in search of the source. "Probably just a wild animal," Mark said, though he didn't sound convinced. They tried to shake off the fear and went to their tents, hoping for a good night's sleep. In the dead of night, Lisa woke up to the sound of rustling outside her tent. She unzipped the entrance and peeked out, her flashlight revealing a horrifying sight. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, its skin pale and decayed. Lisa screamed, waking the others. They stumbled out of their tents, armed with whatever they could find. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself to be a zombie, its mouth opening in a guttural moan. More figures emerged from the darkness, their eyes fixed on the terrified campers. The friends fought to defend themselves, but the zombies were relentless. Tom was the first to be dragged away, his screams echoing through the forest. The others ran, hoping to find refuge in the deeper parts of the woods. They stumbled upon an old, decrepit house hidden among the trees. With no other options, they ran inside and barricaded the doors and windows. The house was filled with the stench of decay, and strange symbols covered the walls, confirming Jack's story. The zombies surrounded the house, their moans filling the air. The friends tried to come up with a plan, but fear clouded their minds. Sarah found an old book filled with spells and rituals, written in a language she couldn't understand. Desperate, they decided to perform one of the rituals, hoping it would lift the curse, or at least buy them some time. As they chanted the ancient words, the air grew colder, and the symbols on the walls began to glow. The zombies broke through the windows, their eyes fixed on the friends. The ritual seemed to have no effect, and the undead advanced, their moans growing louder. Mark was the next to fall, his screams echoing through the house. Jack, Lisa, and Sarah continued the chant, their voices shaking with fear. Just as the zombies closed in, a blinding light filled the room. The undead screamed in agony, their bodies disintegrating before their eyes. The light faded, and the house fell silent. The friends were exhausted, but alive. They knew they couldn't stay in the forest any longer. As they made their way back to civilization, the memory of that night would haunt them forever, a chilling reminder of the curse of Blackwood Forest. Crimson Peak was a place that locals avoided at all costs. The mountain was said to be haunted by the spirits of those who had disappeared there over the years. Despite the warnings, a group of paranormal investigators, Emily, Jake, Rachel, and Sam, decided to spend a night on the mountain to document any supernatural activity. They arrived at the base of Crimson Peak just as the sun was setting. The path up the mountain was narrow and treacherous, but they were determined to reach the summit. As they climbed, the air grew colder and a thick fog began to roll in. They set up their equipment near an old, abandoned cabin that locals claimed was the epicenter of the hauntings. The cabin was in disrepair, its windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. They decided to set up their base camp inside, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal. As night fell, the investigators began their work, setting up cameras and recording devices throughout the cabin and the surrounding woods. Emily, the leader of the group, explained the history of Crimson Peak. They say the mountain was once a burial ground for a long-forgotten tribe. The spirits of the dead are said to roam the woods, seeking revenge on anyone who disturbs their rest. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin's broken windows. Jake, ever the skeptic, tried to laugh it off. "Ghost stories to scare tourists will be fine," he said, though his unease was evident. The group settled in, waiting for any signs of activity. Hours passed, and the cabin remained eerily silent, just as they were beginning to think the legends were just that, legends. Emily's camera picked up a strange movement outside the cabin. She motioned for the others to follow her, and they stepped out into the cold night. The fog had thickened, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. As they moved deeper into the woods, they heard a low, guttural moan. The sound sent chills down their spines, and they realized they were not alone. Emerging from the fog were figures with glowing eyes and decayed flesh. The zombies moved slowly, but with a terrifying determination. Rachel screamed, and the group scrambled to find weapons, grabbing branches and rocks from the forest floor. The investigators fought desperately, but the zombies were relentless. Sam was the first to fall, his screams echoing through the woods as the undead dragged him away. The others ran, hoping to find refuge in the deeper parts of the forest. They stumbled upon an old, decrepit chapel hidden among the trees. With no other options, they ran inside and barricaded the doors and windows. The chapel was filled with the stench of decay, and strange symbols covered the walls, hinting at dark rituals performed long ago. The zombies surrounded the chapel, their moans filling the air. The investigators tried to come up with a plan, but fear clouded their minds. Emily found an old book filled with spells and rituals, written in a language she couldn't understand. Desperate, they decided to perform one of the rituals, hoping it would lift the curse, or at least buy them some time. As they chanted the ancient words, the air grew colder, and the symbols on the walls began to glow. The zombies broke through the windows, their eyes fixed on the investigators. The ritual seemed to have no effect, and the undead advanced, their moans growing louder. Jake was the next to fall, his screams echoing through the chapel. Emily and Rachel continued the chant, their voices shaking with fear. Just as the zombies closed in, a blinding light filled the room. The undead screamed in agony, their bodies disintegrating before their eyes. The light faded, and the chapel fell silent. The investigators were exhausted, but alive. They knew they couldn't stay on the mountain any longer. As they made their way back to civilization, the memory of that night would haunt them forever, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked on Crimson Peak.